Welcome back to the Fresh Freedom Podcast. This is a podcast with the freedom-loving freshman members of the House of Representatives, where we provide you a behind-the-scenes look at what's happening in Congress. And today, I'm joined by my fellow conservative freshman member of Congress, Josh Burkeen from Oklahoma. We have two special guests today, Representative Kevin Hern from Oklahoma as well, and Ben Cline from Virginia. Kevin has served in the House since 2018 and is the chairman of the Republican Study Committee, a famous caucus within the House. And Ben has served in the House since 2019, and he is the chairman of the RSC's Budget and Spending Task Force. Guys, thank you for joining Josh and I on Fresh Freedom.
It's good to be with you guys.
Great to be with you.
Oklahoma, well represented at the table.
we have a majority now.
Actually, that's right.
So just to give people a little bit of your background, we'll start with you, Ben. You actually served as a chief of staff before you ran for office to become a member. Tell us how that happened.
So my predecessor, Bob Goodlatte, got elected in 1992, and that was back when Republicans hadn't been in the majority in 50 years. And little-known backbencher named Newt Gingrich led them to the majority in 94, and that's when I started with Bob Goodlatte. I was his chief of staff and left to go back home and go to law school and get married and raise a family, and thought I had left the swamp behind. But when he retired, the people of the 6th District of Virginia asked me to go fight for them, and I'm happy to be doing that every day.
How many years, Ben, were you chief?
I was chief for 2. I was on his staff for 8, from 94 to 02.
Okay, so you were there the Contract of America days and
Yeah.
balanced budget of 2000. And
Yep.
Okay.
And fighting Clinton.
Term limits.
Fighting against Bill Clinton the whole time.
So how was the process coming back? You know, you were being a chief, now being a member, it's got to give you some insights on how to deal with staff.
Well, sure. Being a staffer gives you a little bit more insight into how staffers are working as a team, and you're not just the boss; you're part of that team, and so reminding them that they're part of a bigger team, the Republican Party, but also representing. They're working hard for the people of the 6th District of Virginia, and so what they do each and every day is going to directly benefit somebody who needs help back in the district with casework, or is going to benefit from the legislation that we passed to get government off their backs and out of their wallets.
And Kevin, I understand that you were a hog farmer before selling your farm in order to buy your first McDonald's franchise in Little Rock, Arkansas. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
So my question to you is being a member of Congress like wrestling hogs?
Well, it's like wrestling hogs. I grew up on chicken farms, so I chased, herding chickens, herding pigs. It's kind of all the same stuff, It's when I ran my race, I actually ran an ad against my opponent, who was a longtime district attorney in Tulsa, and I said, it's like, politicians that are historically, eating at the trough, and he didn't like it much. But a lot of people in the rural district of my district at the time really thought that was appropriate. And having been a hog farmer, I was really in tune to what that looked like. But it is an interesting time we live in right now. And thank you for doing this, because we have a real spending problem in America. The president's budget just came out $7.3 trillion. For the American budget, and it's just insane. Increased taxes. You're seeing a president that's got 50 years of being a politician. It's the same old Democrat policies of tax and spend.
Well, you're kind of stepping in where I was going to go next.
Before you do that, I want to. So, did you run a maturing operation? Was it a farrowing operation?
Feeder pigs.
So you were taking feeder pigs at
40 pounds, 30 to 40 pounds, growing to 160, 180 pounds in about 10 weeks, or actually about 16 weeks.
Wow.
So we had about 3.5 turns, 2.5 turns, 3 turns a year.
How did you make that transition from, growing up around the vaccination schedule with with poultry and then flipped.
Well, so at the time, I'd been an engineer, and the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up in '86, and so I had to go find something different to do. And a buddy of mine owned McDonald's Little Rock. He said, "You should try this franchising program." The problem is,
how'd you go from growing up in a poultry to getting into hog farming?
Well, so we grew up. I always grew up on farms, and
Right.
so my uncle at the time worked for Tyson Foods, and Tyson was getting into the hog business, and I didn't want to get in the chicken business. I'd spent a life, gathering eggs, catching chickens, and all that. And I said, well, let's try the hog business, because everybody had chicken farms. And so this was in 1988, and I started this hog farm, and had about 160 head of steers that I would grow out and sell. And so I've got all the scars and squeeze chutes and all that. And then
So you were taking the poultry or the hog litter, putting it on your pasture?
I was. I had
raising cattle?
irrigation. I had 2 Mack trucks
Oh my
that I
gosh.
drew. I had 3,100 pound or 3,100 gallon liquid fertilizer trucks.
Yeah.
And hauled that, sold that. And my brother actually was on the farm every day, but I was working about 80 hours a week in the franchising program. Had bought and sold real estate, and then also had a computer software program, plus the hog farm, plus cattle. So I had a lot going on at the time.
Then you upped your franchise to McDonald's.
So I did that for 10 years, and I saved $100,000 to get my first restaurant, sold the farm, bought my first McDonald's in 1997, January 17th, 1997 in North Little Rock. There 2 years, then moved to Muskogee, in your district.
So because of the Oklahoma viewers, they would want me to ask that kind of question. We're going to, y'all just know this,
No.
part of this podcast is we give them a look at something that they may never see.
Yeah.
Just the behind the scenes of who Kevin Hern is. So thanks, man, for
Yeah,
expounding
you
on
bet,
that.
you bet.
And both of you, since being elected, you're two of the most conservative members of Congress, along with Josh and myself.
Do you notice how you weave that in at the end?
I like that.
And you guys are we are all part of the RSC, and Kevin, you're the chairman of the Republican Study Group. Can you tell folks what that organization is?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's the conservative conscience of the conference. That's kind of how it's been billed for the last 50 years, and it's ebbed and flowed to how conservative it really was. And today has 180 members, so obviously it's very big, and people want to be involved because they want to be involved in really good policy. And so we worked hard on balanced budgets, and that's what Ben has been. I chaired for 2 years. Ben has chaired for 2 years now. And we put forward a balanced budget in contrast to what budgets you see come out of the president's office now, which never balances, and it's really good. And we talked about staffers, Eric. That staffers are what started the RSC back when President Nixon kind of was taking a left turn toward being pretty liberal, being from California. Staffers stepped forward and said, we've got to have somebody that really holds the conservative conscience of what Republicans remain. That was in 1974. And so they started working hard, and they kind of built this up, and it was called everything, conservative action teams and all these different things. And it moved to the RSC, and it really kind of took a hiatus for a few years there. And Congressman Cline mentioned about Newt Gingrich, and he resurrected that in 1994. Had 4 members that kind of rotated for a period of time there as chair, and actually a member from Oklahoma was one of those 4. And so when it kind of got its footing back, and started,
Who was that?
That was Ernest Istook back in the day. And
First guy I interned for.
yeah. And so as that thing kind of moved forward, and it's kind of built traction, and it's kind of wavered, and we've tried to reinstill, and I know Ben and all of you all have worked hard on making sure it's has conservative policy coming forward. Appreciate it very much.
I enjoy being a part of RSC.
Absolutely.
It's one of the highlights of my week.
So the budget task force, of which you've all have allowed us to sit on, those of us that you gave a chance to participate. This week, you all are rolling out, is it tomorrow it's tomorrow, the RSC budget. And so, not to steal your thunder, but I would love to talk about the contrast of 5 trillion that Biden suggests over the next 10 years to be raised in taxes, compared to moving to a balance in 7 years. So that's a pitch to let one of you start knocking away at it.
I'll let the chairman talk to that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we've, and it's not just the 4 of us in a room, coming up with this. This is the entire Republican Study Committee contributing to a process where we just go through the budget item by item, line by line, talk about reforms that work, reforms that don't, what needs saving, what needs consolidating, eliminating. The budget really does lean in on reforming government, and it's not just about dollar signs, it's about reforms that are necessary to change the way of thinking within government, that there are certain things that government is not meant to do, and getting government to actually back away from a lot of those areas. It's a key part of the document.
Rein in regulation. You rein in regulation.
Absolutely, reforming, actually following through with welfare reform, but making the tax cuts that have been so successful to the economy before Joe Biden took office, but during the Trump administration, the tax cuts that were passed, making those permanent. These are all part of the reforms that are going to get our budget back to balance, but also put our country back on track.
When you say back to balance, Kevin, when he says that, he's talking about for all of us who are so frustrated that there's not enough goodwill up here to cut spending, and yet this is a blueprint. Within a number of years, if we will follow this blueprint.
Well, I think that's what's important, Josh, as you said. What's different about this budget process for the RSC versus a typical budget that you may see up here, even the president's budget. This budget has over 285 member initiatives, member legislation that's been put forward, the work's been done by different members of Congress from all walks of life, from all states, that come in and put budget legislation in place that, when enacted, would actually curtail spending. And so it looks at a 7-year balance window. It is one roadmap. I'm sure there are many others, but it is a roadmap.
You say 7-year balance, just to help people understand, what does that mean?
So what that means is, if we look at these, what some that want to spend, and some in our own party, quite frankly, that want to continue to spend, these are austere measures, but still spending trillions of dollars. We cut over $16 trillion in spending over this 7-year period to get to a balanced budget.
So that means by year 7,
we're at neutral. We're at
no
zero.
More deficits, no more $1.7 trillion
back
deficits.
to neutral.
But I think that's important, Josh, is we're getting back to zero 7 years from now. 7 years from now. Nobody in a business, nobody in their personal life, no cities, no states, no counties could ever live that long. They have to do it next year. They have to do it every year. And, I was in our state. I was talking to our state legislatures yesterday, and I said, listen, you guys have a supermajority in the House and the Senate. You were part of that at one time. And I said, think about the arguments you're having versus what we're having. Yeah. You guys are talking about how much you're going to give back, to this degree or that degree. But you're talking about empowering the people, which is what we're supposed to be doing as good conservatives. In Washington, D.C., we're talking about imprisoning people because we're taking tax dollars. We're creating spending programs. There's no fiduciary responsibility or responsibility for the spending that's going on up here. And people ask, why are we angry a lot of times? It's because we're frustrated that our party is not leading in this endeavor. They're counting on Republicans. If they can't count on Republicans to rein in spending, who can they count on?
And they're demanding this. I mean, the American people are demanding fiscal responsibility. When we were in the state legislature, it was balance the budget every year. And we had to go home to teachers and say, you can't have a raise this year, sorry. Or law enforcement officers and say, I'm sorry, we can't bolster your retirement. We've got to scale it, keep things the way they are because we've got to balance this budget. And people understood. They understood. The state employees understood. Yeah. The taxpayers understood that we couldn't have everything. And in fact, sometimes we had to cut to give back to the taxpayers. But that fiscal responsibility is totally absent in Washington. It's totally missing, and it's time we restored it.
So this is my first. I've been here for 1 year and 3 months now. And I've almost taken the black pill because in that short amount of time, it's become clear to me that the people that are supposed to be here to save America.
I'm sitting here racking my brain. Black pill.
Yeah, what is that?
So it's
we're from Oklahoma.
Have you seen The Matrix?
Okay.
So the
there's
Matrix
a red pill and a blue pill.
The red pill and the blue pill. The blue pill is if you just want to just keep living in la la land.
Live in the Matrix or in deficit spending.
Then the red pill is if you want to find the truth and you want to follow, that's the conservative route. And then the black pill is there's no hope. There is no hope.
You just end it?
There's no hope.
And we have
so-
some colleagues up here who have taken the black pill, and they just say this place is.
Well, that's why it's important to know, Seven. That's why I wanted to expound upon. When I, get to talking to constituents, I talk myself into depression because of the lack of fiscal restraint and where we're headed within 10 years with entitlements. And so I want people to hear what you've talked about, because I'm from your state, and I've heard you talk about, even before I came to Congress, about you'd worked on and been in Ben's position. Hey, I've put together a budget, but I want people to also understand, what's it going to take to get out of 220 Republicans? What are we going to have to do? And you guys are both happy warriors.
Most of the time.
You're
I was going to
happy
say,
warriors.
Most of
I
the
had
time.
somebody say that the other day.
It's a little difficult
No,
right
that's
now.
that's a great compliment. I remember David Barton telling me that when we were state lawmakers during the day. It was a challenge to be a happy warrior. So I see you two as happy warriors. What are we going to do? Because that's the only way I think you're going to turn people up here. It's not going to be being mean-spirited and them writing you off intellectually. What are we going to do as happy warriors to be able to turn the 80 to 100 who won't vote to cut to the level that we know that it's going to have to be cut? And even phasing stuff in. What's it going to take to get those 80 members out of the 220 Republicans to start voting on stuff like this?
Well, I think first is you have to be steadfast in your own vote, right? You can't waver on your vote. And as you all know, the press is relentless, certainly on me, as they have been time and time again, why I won't support, continuing resolutions. And I say, I'm not going to continue to spend at this level. I mean, I go home, I get validated every time I go home. We've got to get our spending under control. We've got to be fiscally responsible. We've got to respect the taxpayer dollars. And I get refreshed. I think that's why it's important that every member go home every weekend and talk to constituents at home. Because people cannot understand how we can continue to do what we do. And you can't possibly, there's no member up here can possibly in a very straight-faced way, an honest way, explain to them how we can keep spending this way and we're doing good for America. It's our colleague David Schweikert does a great job, and I may be the only person that watches him, but I spent an hour watching him, and he says I'm like the only one person that watches him, but it's just math. I mean, it's just math. We cannot continue to do this and expect we're going to have a better outcome for our kids and grandkids.
And what frustrates me is I often hear from people that don't want to make the spending cuts. They'll say, well, the real problem is the mandatory spending. Until we really fix the mandatory spending, we're never going to get to a balanced budget. And I understand what they're saying, but politically, you're telling me you can't cut funding for the new FBI headquarters, but we're going to talk about Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, this budget actually looks at all that. It looks at all that. It guarantees that those folks that are paid in their entire life will get their benefits. But people that have not paid in a dollar, we're going to have to make some adjustments. I mean, that's the honest truth. And this happened under Reagan. It actually happened under Clinton with Newt Gingrich and Bob Dole and others to push it to this point. But we've not had any adjustments in these since 93 or 86 and 93 in the two respective programs, Social Security and Medicare. This is not about cutting benefits people that are near or in retirement, people who have dedicated their life to working hard and paying into these systems. But we have less people paying in today, these programs. These programs have gotten so big that they may not work for our youngest people today.
My kids, I have twin 12-year-old daughters, they won't see Social Security at this rate. In 2033, the trust fund is insolvent. And so what Democrats are advocating is the same status quo, which is essentially bankrupting the system and forcing benefits to go down, because when the insolvency does hit, you essentially have to reduce benefits to match what comes in. That's what the current law requires. So,
not by Congress. That'd be the actuaries who'll do that.
That's right. And so that's what the Democrats are saying, putting their heads in the sand, saying. What we're saying is, let's address it in a way that ensures that people get the benefits that they worked for, but and that the system is improved so that it's there for my kids and your kids and the future.
I do this sometimes when I'm talking to people. So just to help visualize, if you were to take 3 pieces of paper and make this the 3 boxes, in 1960, we controlled in Congress 2 of these papers in terms of our discretionary budget. And then this was the mandatory side, which includes Social Security, Medicare, and then we have the Great Society.
And interest on our debt.
And interest on, and then we get into the Great Society, and all of a sudden, where Congress used to have control in the discretionary, determining the appropriation levels, 2 of the 3 boxes, now it's shift to Congress now only has control over one box of discretionary, and just so happens because now Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, supplemental security income, interest on our debt is 2/3 of our spending. We only had enough revenue last year coming in to support these two boxes.
Well, it's on autopilot. Congress still can do something
Well,
about it.
I think what
but
Josh is getting to, we borrowed 100% of our operating
that's
budget.
a good way to put it.
That 1.7 trillion that was for what we spent 12 months voting on last year.
Yep.
That was the size of our deficit. So here's where I'm going with this. So people to understand, the mandatory side consumes all the revenue coming in. Congress spends an entire year debating over unpaid for, borrowed funds, and this is something that always gets people when I share this. If you go through our Constitution, where our Constitution talked about the priority of defense in Article 1, Section 8 is 1/4 of our enumerated powers of Congress, defense spending's here. It's discretionary.
Yep.
Food stamps and Medicaid for the indigent, not Medicare and Social Security, which is supported by the payroll tax, but food stamps and Medicaid, according to our budget, this is mandatory, and troop salary is not. And I think people need to understand how upside down that is in terms of what our founders would look at and say, you've got to be kidding me. Troop salary is not your priority.
And it's constitutionally mandated that we defend the sovereignty of this nation.
Right.
And that, we could talk about that the rest of the evening. But to your point, I mean, the money we're borrowing today just to fund the operation. I mean, think about everybody that's watching this, listening to this, whether you're Republican.
All 5 people.
Oh, no. I mean,
We doubled it, too.
Yeah.
There'll be more of
Your parents, your
Listen,
parents.
I say this to Democrats, and I know when we go talk to chambers and stuff, there are Democrats there. I say, listen, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, or don't give 2 hoots about politics. You tell me how this makes sense.
You bet.
How would you think it would work out if you borrowed 100% what it took your family to live on every single year? How long could you do that? How long could you borrow 100% it takes to run your business? How long will a bank loan you that money? I said, it is insane what's going on in Washington, D.C. And I said, until you start holding members of Congress accountable, House and Senate, for the spending in America, it's never going to change. And that's our frustration, is that people aren't getting held accountable. We're doing our job. We're taking the heat up here in the press. Everybody else, by the way, I gave you a shout out to the press. They said, can you give us some inside baseball, what you're going to say, embargo statements? I said, listen to Eric Burleson's podcast. So that's going to be out there, buddy.
There you go.
You may have 7 listeners.
All
now.
right.
Yeah.
People are going to respond. They're going to say, okay, then raise everybody's taxes, right? That's what we're going to get, right? You're going to get that when you show up and speak. People say, well, okay, then if this is the case, then this is the Democrat mantra, then raise everybody's taxes. Since 1950, if you look on the average, conditional to our GDP, our gross domestic product, we've been anywhere from 18 to 20% revenue in consideration to our GDP. We're at historic norms. Anytime it gets above that, there's always a tax cut. Anytime it blows below it, it self-adjusts. People demand an adjustment. It's what Reagan said. The reason why we have deficits is not because we tax too little, it's because we spend too much. So here's where I'm going to go with this. I looked this up. 1792, there was 4 million people in America.
That's Oklahoma.
That's right. In 1792, there were 4 million Americans. That was the amount of their revenue and their spend was $4 million. And so that is $1 per person. It took them 4 days. It was 25 cents in 1792. 4 days to pay off your tax burden, your federal tax burden. Of course, we all know, tax freedom today is now in April. It's 130 days now.
Yeah.
And the difference between the federal government that was small and was limited, which our founders set up, and where we find ourselves today, and 100% of what we're debating is borrowed money. The person who will say, then raise my taxes, what do we know about revenue? What do we know about the people say, well, tax the 1%. They pay 40% of all income taxes right now. The top 1% pay, according to, if you anybody look this up, top 1% pay 40% of all income taxes, which is the $2 trillion of our revenue, or 4.5 that comes from income taxes. And so if that's the case, and 40% of the top of the 1% pay 40% of all income taxes, the top 50% of all income earners pay 97% of all income taxes, and the bottom 50% of all income earners pay only 2.3% of all income taxes. When you tell Democrats that, then they'll say, well, still raise everybody's taxes. It still doesn't compute. Biden's budget doesn't exemplify raising taxes to pay off the debt. That's kind of what we're going to talk about, right? So he raises, over the next 10 years, he wants to raise $5 trillion. But he doesn't use it to pay down the deficit. What does he use it for?
You spend more.
He spends $5 trillion more.
Yep.
Yeah, so Josh, besides he and I being from Oklahoma, and you're from Oklahoma, Ben, originally.
Born in Stillwater.
Yeah. We have a commonality that we both got in politics at different times for different ways, but was Senator Tom Coburn. And Tom Coburn used to say that when more than 50% of Americans are getting some kind of benefit from the government, you'll never be able to cut it, because the constituent is so big that they'll put so much pressure on you. Yeah. I'm willing to challenge that. I think that, I think Americans. I actually heard this on a Fox News TV thing. It was with Neil Cavuto. He was interviewing the guy that started Home Depot, and he said, "This guy." It's an incredible story, really. But the guy said, "I believe that Americans, if they could truly trust the government, they would allow their taxes to be raised if they knew that money would go directly to paying off the debt for their kids and grandkids." Wow. Yeah. There is zero trust that would ever happen here. And we see it in the president's budget.
That's the point.
We see it in the president's budget.
He wants to raise $5 trillion, and he used every bit of it to spend more. None of it's going to pay down the deficit.
And yet his son won't even pay his taxes.
Well, that's a whole other thing, though.
Yeah, and I do agree with you that the American people are wanting to have fiscal responsibility put back into the system. I think if you explain and connect the way that all the spending of the past 3.5 years, has impacted inflation, has impacted mortgage rates, has impacted the prices at the grocery store, that people get it and they say too much spending is having a direct negative impact on my life. And we have got to reduce the spending rate so that we can get back to regular fiscal responsibility, fiscal order, normal inflation rates, and prices that families can afford. So I think American people are getting behind that idea.
I think sometimes we don't give the right message. You think about your kids. If you give your kids money on a Friday night to take a date out, your boys, your girls, there's always a caveat, right? Be home by 11. There's always something attached to that dollar. Children understand, kids understand, adults understand, right? Because they learn that early on. But what we need to educate Americans is every time the federal government gives you $1, there's a requirement for getting that dollar. We're going to own a piece of you to do that. Either by higher inflation, higher interest rates, a burden on your children, your grandchildren, and all the future generations of your family. Nothing is free in this world.
It's a tax. It's either a hidden tax in inflation or a tax in the future for your kids.
Yeah.
So give us an idea of the highlights of the RSC budget.
Well, it's divided in several different portions, and you have the portion that deals with, they kind of resemble the different appropriations bills and what's going to have to be addressed in each of the different sections. So you've got, while you do have farm products, farm spending programs, those kinds of issues, you also have border security that is a major problem. So the provisions of legislation that we've already passed, H.R. 2 is in there. Energy legislation, you have
some food stamp reform.
Food stamp reform, absolutely. Welfare reform, absolutely. And restoring some of those original reforms that were part of welfare reform that have kind of lapsed.
And most people don't know that 80 to 85% of the farm bill is food stamps.
Yeah.
Most people don't understand that.
Well, I think the big issue here is why this budget is so important, and why a budget is so important, a budget and the appropriations process done in regular order, which for everybody watching, that's having the budget done by mid-March. And then mid-April, and then getting the appropriations done by June so the Senate can get theirs done so we can have this conference. But when you look at the reality, the way this place operates is we try to go fix ag, or we go try to fix, defense, and we don't put it holistically in a budget. When you put it all together, it really is encompassing that nobody is. I always said this in business. I've said this since I started doing the budget, 4 years ago now, is that everybody gives a little so that nobody gives a lot. And if you do it piecemeal, everybody thinks everything's on me. If you talk to the ag guys, it's all on me. I'm having to sacrifice everything, and defense is not getting any cuts. And you have to have a budget to show how it's all encompassing, because if you're driving down energy costs, the farmers are going to win on that. If you have good tax policies, the farmers are going to win on that. And so if you don't need all the subsidy programs or the duplicative spending on farm programs, but you can't just say, okay, we're going to cut ag because they're too big. The money's going all to the big farmers, and not do anything else to help anywhere else to offset that. And so the problem is this budget, or not the problem. The good thing about this budget, it's all encompassing, as Ben said. It takes every segment of the entire budget and contrasts. And when you look at this versus Joe Biden's budget last week, it is like night and day.
The math is the math. I mean, so Biden's budget doesn't solve anything; it just increases spending. And so when you talk to people and you say, you may be upset that your government may give you less, but the question is, do you not understand that the government's taking from you whatever that they are providing you? So whatever little benefit, however much check you got in the mail under the bailouts, the government took that away from you in the last couple of years through inflation. The average family of four, I think the last statistic that our staff provided, is paying $15,000 more this year on the whole, $1,300 more a month to buy the exact same goods and services as compared to January of 2021. So whatever the government's given you, it's taken from you in inflation. And so people have got to understand, when you take a dollar bill, fold it in fifths, and you tear off 1/5 of that, that's the devaluation of our currency just since 2017.
Yep.
What's the best government? The best government for you is one that is keeping more of that dollar in your pocket and never sending it to Washington, D.C. in the first place.
Well, guys, thank you for being fighters that you are, the conservative warriors, the ones that are actually here to save America. And not only that, but being the leaders, taking a step
Was
forward.
this part one? I don't know.
Yeah, we'll have you back.
It's going to be like Dune. We'll have part one and we'll have part two. And so
I want to compound on that, though. I mean, the RSC budget is aggressive. And so I mean this. Thank you. Thank you for leading on that. Thanks for leaning in. I mean, these are things that people go and you have to stand next to that. And most people don't have the courage up here to stand next to the cuts.
We want to show that it can be done. People think, oh, they're black-pilled. They say, you can't do it anymore. It's just too much, $33 trillion in debt and $1 trillion deficits. You just can't get it done. Well, we got it done. It's right there in black and white. We invite everybody to
we just have
look
to have
at
the
it.
guts to do it.
Now
I think what's great, what Ben did with the policy or the budget is regarding policies. When people usually think budgets, they think, well, I got to take what I make and take utilities off. What this budget does, it actually looks at all the policies underneath. And every policy we have in Washington, D.C., just like every decision you make at home has an economic impact to your family, we take the policies and say, if we implement these policies, we can have a positive impact. Like if we secured our border, we wouldn't have billions spent
4,000 per illegal
spent on illegal immigrants, and all these things really matter. If we looked at how we deal with China, we would have a more secure economy. All these things matter, and when you have 285 members that have put forth the pieces of legislation that are incorporated in this budget, it really makes a difference. These are very thoughtful members of Congress from all across the country that have contributed to this budget.
Well, thank you for what you guys do. Thanks for being the leaders. And I want to say thank you to our amazing listeners. If you enjoyed the banter and the bold ideas, show us some love. Hit the like button. Subscribe for your regular dose of freedom and share it. And take time to follow these gentlemen as well. The Fresh Freedom Podcast is your ticket to liberty. Available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, X, and Rumble. Until next time, stay fresh and stay free. We'll catch you on the next episode of Fresh Freedom.